you spoke about the 1 out of 5 wine labels as far as being African American in this space. What made you guys choose this space, and why do you think so many people in our culture choose not to become wine and liquor ownership instead of just partying and drinking? Like, why do you think we're not more owners in the space too?
Well, it's barriers of entry, and so even for us, the barriers of entry for it was a barrier for us with not having land. Where with me and the two of my partners, none of us came from families where we had land that we could grow grapes on, or we weren't inheriting anything that was passed down to us. And so a lot of this becomes like a wealth gap, where you kind of think about it, where I think, even you think about this space where I think a lot of times people can say, why are African Americans just consumers? A lot of times is systemic, is really deeper than us just wanting to be consumers. It's like kind of a larger picture. And so I think even with us, it gets to this idea of just the educational piece, the community piece, and the inclusion, like the equity piece, because then it becomes a whole education part where I feel like even with wine sometimes, or even red wine, I feel like it can be very polarizing. Where I think even in our culture, a lot of times with African Americans, like cocktails are our go-to, and so even for us as a brand, we kind of figured out of understanding that, like, all right, we have a sangria recipe where, like, even when we do events, we'll have a sangria. It's just another option of just kind of figuring out ways, how do we introduce wine to someone who's not the traditional wine drinker. And so I think a big thing for us is always about how can we make wine approachable, and not this whole thing of this thing that's so foreign. And so a lot of our private events we've been doing have been at art galleries, where we've allowed our patrons to kind of put wine in context. Where a lot of times someone would probably say my go-to is a tequila, a whiskey, a cognac or something, but oh, I'll drink wine because now it makes sense because I'm at an art gallery, or I'm looking at art, or I'm having a conversation. And so it puts somebody in a mindset or in an environment where they can understand, like, oh, now I understand the consumption of this, or why this makes sense. And so I think the other piece of it is just I think with just wealth, I think just it becomes a whole thing where even for us now, like our goal is to open the tasting room in Richmond, eventually open a winery somewhere in Virginia. And so with that, it's the whole thing of building capital. And so with it becomes this whole thing of know-how and educating. But I know one of the things I'm very adamant about, and me and my team, is just really educating people, on our lessons learned as we're going through the process, because I believe within this space, it should be more people who look like us. It should be more people understanding, like, if I don't have the resources, what are things I can do to get into this industry, or where do I start? And so even for me, it was just a lot of research, just understanding that Virginia was like a premier wine territory in the United States. A lot of times we think of wine, we only think of California, we think of Napa Valley, but even in the 1800s, early on, like Thomas Jefferson, was like a big advocate for wine, or like him and like a lot of early on presidents were trying to figure out how to make Virginia a premier wine territory. Or even another thing, just even doing research, knowing that the first black winery was actually established in Virginia in the late 1890s. And so just kind of knowing the history of like the territory or the place, it kind of gives us more context of just like what we're doing, and where it's not foreign, but it's something where it's like us really continuing a legacy of something that's been happening here that like we really want to amplify more.